Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have your entire life stolen in a single sentence? Have you ever asked yourself if your job, your family, your memories, everything that makes you could be erased because a faceless clerk decided so? And have you ever feared that your destiny is not your own, but just a number on someone else's data sheet? If you have, then stay with me. This story is for you. And if you want to hear every painful whisper of lives forgotten in the machinery of the Imperium, subscribe and keep walking with us into the shadows, because once you start, there's no turning back. The taste of copper filled my mouth the moment I heard the words. Citizen Kalen Voss, designation 77 Alpha 9992. You have been selected for the Emperor's sacred service. The voice belonged to Adept Thalison, an administratum clerk whose tone was so flat it could have been carved from stone. He did not look at me. His augmetic eye flickered as it scrolled endless lines of data across his slate. The faint grinding inside the mechanism reminded me of the manufactorum where I had worked for 15 years, machines chewing metal, unfeeling, unstoppable. I stood barefoot on the cold floor of the processing chamber, staring at the beige walls that seemed to lean closer with every second. My throat tightened. My tongue bled where I had bitten it. There must be a mistake, I whispered, though the echo of my voice sounded weak in that cavern of fluorescent light. I'm just a mechanic. I keep the grinders working in Sector Gamma 7. I don't have skills. I don't have training. At last, Thalison raised his head. His human eye was brown, rimmed with fatigue, his skin pale from decades without natural light. There was no mercy there, no recognition, just duty. There is no mistake, he said. The selection process is thorough. Your genetic markers, your resonance, your psychological profile. Everything has been reviewed and approved. You will report to Sanctum Omega 33 at the 19th hour. For preparation. The word echoed preparation. My chest grew tight. The walls pressed in. I became aware of how shallow my breathing had become, how the recycled air smelled of metal and disinfectant. My knees threatened to buckle. What exactly is sacred service, I asked. For a moment, his mask of indifference cracked just enough for me to see something like pity or envy. You will sustain the light that guides humanity through the darkness, he said. Then his eyes fell back to the slate, and I understood the conversation was over. The ride back through the transport tubes took exactly 47 minutes. I counted every second in the reflection, staring back at me through the scratched plexiglass window. The man who looked at me was unremarkable brown hair already thinning at the crown, gray eyes with no spark of wisdom, hands scarred and permanently stained with oil. An ordinary worker, an invisible cog in the endless machine of Terra. Yet now he carried a sentence heavier than any load he had ever lifted chosen for sacred service. Each flicker of light in the tunnel seemed to pulse with the words, chosen, selected, prepared. The language of destiny, but spoken like numbers on a ledger. I pressed my palm against the glass, hoping to anchor myself, and saw only calluses, reminders of years spent fixing grinding wheels. Those hands had never held anything sacred. When I reached my hab unit, nothing had changed. The beige walls still hummed with recycled air. The cot sagged with the same dent from sleepless nights. On the desk sat the single-framed picture of my parents, smiling on their wedding day 47 years ago. They believed in a future brighter than their own. Would they believe in this future for me? Would they call it an honor I tried to eat? But the corpse starch ration turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to read the Primer Imperialis, but the words bled into nonsense. I lay on the cot staring at the ceiling plate's 63 dents, 12 rust stains, One panel misaligned, numbers to keep my mind from unraveling. When the chime for the 19th hour finally rang, I felt hollow, emptied of resistance. I rose, straightened my worker's uniform, and whispered to no one, "I am ready." The capsule that waited for me was unlike any transport I had ever stepped into. Most carriages on Terra were gray boxes built to herd thousands through the arteries of the hive. This one was intimate, suffocating in its elegance. The walls were paneled in what looked like real wood, polished to a dark sheen. Brass fittings gleamed under a warm yellow glow. The air smelled faintly of incense, not metal or recycled chemicals. It was designed to feel sacred, though the effect only deepened my unease. 7 others were already inside, each carrying the same silence that weighed on me. A young woman across from me clutched a pendant in the shape of the Imperial Aquila, her pale fingers trembling around the chain. She tried to smile when our eyes met, but the expression collapsed before it reached her lips. Next to her sat an older man with hands scarred from burns, skin cracked from years of chemical fumes. His eyes were tired, but steady like someone who had made peace with fire long ago. He met my gaze and nodded, a gesture more human than anything I had seen since my summons. Others filled the seats, a girl no older than 18, thin from factory work, a broad man with a mechanical arm whirring softly, a restless boy from the underhive brigades, a woman with dirt still under her nails from tending poisoned soil. None were warriors. None were saints. Just workers, drafted from the endless mass of humanity. The capsule shuddered, and we began to descend. The polished brass fittings rattled. The incense smoke curled in the stale air. No one spoke. We sat in that false sanctity, strangers bound together by a single truth we had been chosen, and whatever awaited us was far below. The capsule rattled as it descended deeper, the hum of machinery echoing like a heartbeat through the wood-paneled walls. For long minutes, no one spoke. Then the old man with burned hands finally broke the silence. "My grandfather used to tell stories," he rasped. His voice carried the rough edge of promethium smoke. He said there were places beneath the palace where they fed souls into machines. Said they burned people like coal. The young analyst across from him, the one with the Aquila pendant, shook her head quickly. "That's superstition," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The Emperor protects. We're chosen for something holy." The factory girl, Helena, hugged her knees to her chest. "Holy doesn't sound like screaming," she whispered. The boy beside her, restless and twitching, glanced toward the capsule doors as if measuring the distance to escape. His augmented companion, Dmitri. The man with the mechanical arm tapped metal fingers against his thigh. The sound was too loud in the confined space, like nails against a coffin lid. The older woman, Senna, spoke next. Her hands were thick from years in poisoned soil, her voice steady but bitter. "I worked 40 years trying to make dead earth grow, and now they summon me here. Tell me this is honor." She spat the last word. No one answered. The brass fittings creaked. The incense was cloying, too sweet, as if to mask the stench of fear. I pressed my back against the seat and tried to breathe evenly. But the words clung to me, souls fed into machines. I had heard the rumors too, whispered in the manufactorum during late shifts, dismissed as heresy. Now, sealed inside this capsule with 7 strangers and no future, the rumor felt less like fantasy and more like prophecy. Silence returned, heavier than before. Only one phrase seemed safe to repeat in our minds. "The Emperor protects." But even that felt fragile here, descending into the dark. The capsule sank lower, its vibrations changing pitch as if the very air grew heavier around us. Through the narrow windows, the world transformed. The steel corridors of the hive gave way to stone carved with impossible precision. Gothic arches rose overhead, their surfaces etched with prayers that writhed when I tried to focus on them. The warm brass glow no longer comforted, it flickered against shadows that seemed to move on their own. Servo skulls drifted past, their hollow sockets glowing red, their mechanical whispers scratching at the edge of hearing. Each one lingered at the glass as though studying us, then vanished back into the incense haze. Statues appeared along the walls, saints or martyrs, though their faces twisted between agony and rapture. Their stone hands reached upward, clawing at something unseen. Helena buried her face against her knees, trembling. Mira clutched her Aquila so tightly her knuckles turned white. The air shifted, thick, damp, laced with ozone and something like burned flesh. Dimitri's augmetic hand clicked uncontrollably, the servos whining in protest. Senna muttered curses under her breath, the syllables sounding harsh against the sanctity of the carved walls. Then, as the capsule passed a vast open shaft, the lights flickered and darkness swallowed us whole. For a heartbeat there was only silence, suffocating. Then it came faint, almost below hearing, but sharp enough to pierce bone. A scream. It was not a human cry alone. It carried anguish too vast, too deep, like countless voices blended into one unending wail. The sound clawed its way into my chest, left me cold and shaking. When the lights returned, no one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. We all knew what we had heard, and we all pretended we had not. Because the truth was worse. The scream had come from a place where sound should never travel. The capsule slowed to a halt with a hiss of pressured air. The doors opened onto a corridor so vast it swallowed sound. The walls glistened with polished stone, veins of gold running like frozen lightning across the surface. At the far end stood two figures in golden armor, each taller than any man I had ever seen. Custodians. Even motionless, their presence was suffocating. Their armor shimmered with an inner radiance, as if the metal itself rejected shadow. Guardian spears rested in their hands, humming softly with power that could cut through tanks, through cities, through us in an instant. No one dared breathe too loudly. These were not soldiers. They were legends, living weapons shaped by the Emperor himself. The tech adepts in red robes motioned us forward. Their brass masks reflected the light, their servo limbs clicking with every precise step. None of us resisted. How could we? Passing between the Custodes was like crossing a threshold between life and something far heavier. They did not acknowledge us, did not move an inch. But I felt their eyes on me through the visors, judgmental, eternal, as though weighing my soul against some impossible scale. Beyond the gate, the corridor opened into a chamber that stole the breath from my lungs. Thrones lined the circular walls, dozens of them, each one wrapped in a tangle of cables and crystalline growths that pulsed with an eerie glow. On those thrones sat people living, but barely. Their eyes rolled back, mouths slack, bodies pierced by tubes feeding into flesh and bone. At the center rose the largest throne, a black colossus that seemed to devour light itself. Cables as thick as my torso snaked outward from its base, disappearing into walls and ceiling. Crystals jutted from its arms like tumors, pulsing in rhythm with something vast and unseen. Helena whimpered softly, muffled against her sleeve. Dimitri clenched his augmetic hand until the gears squealed. Marcus muttered something under his breath, words meant only for himself. I could not look away. The truth was clear: we were not pilgrims. We were not honored servants. We were fuel waiting to be fed into the machine. The chamber hummed like a living heart. Every cable pulsed with dim light. Every crystalline vein glowed faintly as if carrying the essence of blood, but it was not blood. It was something far more precious and far more terrible. A figure stepped forward from the cluster of robed attendants. His face was hidden behind a brass mask shaped like a human skull, lenses glowing faint red. Servo limbs unfurled from his back, each tipped with a tool that clicked hungrily in the shadows. His voice emerged through a vox grill, flat and metallic, echoing as though spoken from the bottom of a deep tomb. Citizens, you stand in the preparatory chamber of sacred service. Here, the faithful are transformed. Here, the illusion of individuality ends, and true purpose begins. Mira's fingers trembled around her Aquila pendant. What happens to them, she whispered. Eyes fixed on the empty shells strapped to the smaller thrones. They become conduits, the adept replied without hesitation. Their life force, their psychic potential, their very souls are fed into the system. All energy is directed toward one function sustaining the Astronomicon. The word hit me like a hammer. I had heard it my entire life, the Emperor's light, the beacon by which ships sailed the warp. I had never once thought to ask what flame burned behind that light. 1,000 souls each day, the adept continued, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. For 10,000 years. Billions of sacrifices to keep the beacon lit. Without it, your fleets would vanish into madness, your worlds would fall one by one, and your species would die screaming. Marcus clenched his scarred fists, his jaw set in grim resignation. Helena shook her head violently, whispering, "No, no, no," as if denial could undo the sight before her. Senna's eyes burned with hatred, but she said nothing. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as ash. 1,000 a day, for 10 millennia. I looked again at the black throne, and the flickering light from its crystals seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. The adept's final words echoed across the chamber. This is the Emperor's will. You are honored to join the choir. There is no higher service. The first name called was Mira Ka. She rose slowly, her legs trembling as though each step weighed a lifetime. Her Aquila pendant dangled from her fingers, clenched so tightly the edges cut into her palm. The tech adepts guided her to one of the smaller thrones with mechanical precision, their servo limbs clicking in ritual rhythm. She turned her head once, searching our faces for courage. None of us could give it. The needles slid into her flesh with clinical ease. Tubes pierced her arms, her neck, her spine. When the crystalline growths reached for her skull, her body convulsed violently, and her scream tore through the chamber, a scream so raw it stripped the air of sound. Then, silence. Her eyes rolled white. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. A voice from the adepts announced, "Integration complete. Soul resonance optimal." Mira was gone. Only the machine remained. Marcus Thorne stood next. He did not resist. His scarred hands rested calmly on the throne's arms as the needles found their place. "Worked with fire all my life," he muttered. "Fitting I should burn at the end." His transformation was quieter, but no less final. His steady presence vanished into the choir. Helena Vex followed, her thin frame shaking so violently she nearly collapsed. She wept silently, tears carving pale tracks down her cheeks. The machine swallowed her cries as the crystals lit with her essence. Dmitri Vasquez tried to keep his composure, metal fingers tapping until the restraints locked his arm in place. His jaw trembled when the first surge of energy ripped through him. Yarn, the boy, was next, his face pale as ash, his lips moving in prayer, though no words escaped. Senna Thale was the last before me. She spat at the ground, eyes burning with fury. 40 years I gave to poisoned soil, and this is my reward. She sat rigid, her jaw clenched as the machine invaded her. Her body convulsed for long, agonizing minutes before going still. Even then, the readings fluctuated wildly, as though some shard of her defiance still fought inside the system. One by one, they disappeared. One by one, the thrones claimed them, until only I remained. The adepts turned toward me. Their brass masks reflected the pale glow of the chamber, and in their silence I heard the finality of a sentence passed. My knees weakened, yet I walked. My bare feet touched the cold stone with each reluctant step toward the central throne. It loomed above me, impossibly vast, carved from some black material that seemed to drink the light around it. The closer I came, the more it felt alive. The surface pulsed, faint but steady, as if echoing the beat of a buried heart. Cables thicker than my body writhed like veins, disappearing into the walls, carrying power or souls into the abyss beyond. When I touched the throne, the surface felt wrong. Not stone, not metal, something warm, something organic. A tremor ran through me as the restraints snapped shut around my arms and legs, sealing me in place. Then I saw it. Within the crystalline matrix that crowned the throne, a face flickered. Human, yet not. A visage stretched thin by 10,000 years of endless vigil. The eyes were the worst ancient, exhausted, yet burning with unbearable weight. They shifted and locked onto mine. A voice entered my mind, soft but heavy with sorrow. I am sorry. The words almost undid me. They were not the cold commands of the adepts, not the mechanical certainty of doctrine. They were human. They carried grief, guilt, and something worse, recognition. I have done this for 10 millennia, the voice continued, each syllable pressing against the walls of my skull. I have chosen. I have watched. I have endured. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to look away, but the throne held me, and so did his gaze. For the first time, I understood this was no faceless god of legend. This was a man trapped inside eternity, bound to a machine of his own making, drowning in the weight of 1 billion sacrifices. And now, it was my turn to join them. The first needle slid beneath my skin, and the world fractured. Pain came, sharp and total, not only in flesh, but in thought, as if my very self were being carved into pieces. I tried to scream, but the sound collapsed before it left my lips. The throne drank it all. Memories rose like bubbles in boiling water. The manufactorum floor beneath my boots, the grinding wheels I kept alive with oil-stained hands, the scar on my cheek, earned in a spray of sparks 3 years before, my parents smiling on their wedding day, the taste of real meat once, on Foundation Day, a luxury shared in secret. The sound of rain striking corrugated metal above my hab-block roof. Each memory glowed bright for a moment, then was pulled away, catalogued, consumed. I felt another presence among the wires of thought, a vast intelligence, cold and analytical, sorting through me with ruthless precision. Yet behind it lingered something older, more human, unbearably sad, the fragment of the Emperor's mind. He was there, watching as my identity unraveled, and with him came a whisper. I am sorry. Every soul diminishes me. Every name I carry. The boundaries of myself began to fray. Fear fought to hold on, but it dissolved like paper in fire. Then came warmth. A current of voices, millions strong, reached for me. Mira's sharp mind, guiding threads of energy. Marcus's steady presence, anchoring the flow. Helena's fragile hope. Dimitri's mechanical rhythm. Senna's defiance still sparking within the stream. We were not alone. We were together. My final resistance melted. The individual called Kalen Voss slipped into the tide, absorbed and transformed, not erased, reshaped. A note joining a chorus. A single spark added to a fire that blazed brighter than any star. The Astronomicon. We were its fuel, its voice, its light. Through us, ships would find their way across the abyss. Through us, humanity would endure. For the first time in my life, I felt both nothing and everything. I was gone. I belonged. We rose together. 1,000 voices braided into one. Where once I had been Kalen Voss, a mechanic from Gamma 7, now I was a thread woven into something vast beyond measure. The Astronomicon pulsed, brighter than ever, and through its light I saw the galaxy spread before us like a living map. Imperial ships drifted along currents of the warp, their hulls glowing faintly in our sight. Each vessel was fragile, a spark against the endless dark, but our song wrapped around them, steadying their passage. Worlds burned in prayer, billions of human lives whispering into the void, and we answered with light. We had become the Emperor's fire, and yet the throne itself trembled. 10,000 years of strain cracked through its foundations. Systems groaned under the weight of eternity. We felt the Emperor's focus sharpen, a will unyielding, drawing upon our unity with a force that shook reality. No longer was he just a fragment chained to a machine. He was becoming more. The veil between flesh and godhood tore. Golden radiance surged outward, flooding not only the chamber but the warp itself. Chaos fleets shuddered as their drives faltered. Orc warbands turned upon one another, maddened by confusion. Tyrannid hive ships recoiled as though repelled by a taste of poison. The Necron tombs stirred uneasily in their silence. All across the stars, the Imperium felt the shift. For the first time in 10 millennia, the beacon no longer devoured 1,000 lives each day. It burned on the will of a God made real, a God born of sacrifice. And we, every soul taken, every worker, farmer, soldier, child, we were part of him now. Our memories, our griefs, our small joys had become the foundation of his divinity. I did not exist anymore, and yet I endured. My love, my pain, the sound of rain, the pride of honest work, all preserved within his infinite mind. The long night was ending. The dawn was breaking, and in that golden light, our sacrifice was no longer tragedy. It was vindication. The chamber fades, but the echo of voices lingers. 1,000 souls whispering. The Emperor protects, but who tells their stories? Who remembers the faces behind the light that guides humanity through the abyss? If you have followed this far, you have walked with them, felt their fear, their loss, their surrender, and there are countless more. So stay with us, subscribe, and return to hear the next voice carried into the dark. Because in this universe, silence is death, and remembrance is the only light that endures.